We were going to talk about psychedelic mushrooms. Chris Cantwell, you had a story from where?
Yeah, the story's from CNN, and it was of particular interest to me because I don't know how much I've talked about on here. Like, I don't do drugs. Like, I don't even smoke weed.
You have, though.
I have, but it's not my thing, right?
You've done mushrooms.
I have done mushrooms, yeah. The last time I did mushrooms was in 2013.
Okay.
You know, and the last time I had done it before that was probably over 10 years ago.
It was 2013 for me. That was when I swore them off because I was tired of puking to get high.
Yeah, I have never suffered that with mushrooms, but I have found them to be, and far different from acid or PCP or many of the other drugs that I used to do. I always found mushrooms like sort of therapeutic, right? That like it was a nice way to, I don't know, reflect, to get in touch with myself and stuff.
Absolutely.
And I saw this story today in CNN, and it says, think psychedelics, and you'll probably think of bright colors, hallucinations, spirituality, and an overall mystical experience. For centuries, these drugs have been used.
That is, if you've actually used them.
Oh, right. Unless you just like saw like Reefer Madness, and you were like, oh my God, you're going to die.
Yeah, if you're just like somebody who doesn't know anything about them, then you may be believe all kinds of lies about psychedelics.
Right. You're going to try to fly off a roof or something like that. Hasn't been my experience.
But I think it's interesting that this is appearing at CNN.com and not like, the Psychedelic Experience or website or something like that.
Right, exactly. If I was reading this in High Times, I probably wouldn't have even brought it to the show.
But it's interesting because CNN, they have Sanjay Gupta on their staff, and he's like this talking head doctor character who's been on the news for a long time. He made headlines last year when he reversed positions about marijuana, and he had for the longest time gone on the air and talked about how medical marijuana is bad and it's just a front for legalization, and it kind of took all the prohibitionist lines about marijuana. And then at some point he actually looked into it, and he came out and honestly recanted what he'd said. He actually went through the process of creating a feature-length documentary film about cannabis and has totally changed his tune. So
wow.
It's not surprising to me. Like, to somebody who doesn't know about that, they'd be surprised to see an article like this on CNN. But CNN has sort of been out there with Sanjay Gupta. He's not the author of this story. I looked at it. You sent it to me earlier
Yeah,
tonight.
This is Mira Sendhilingam.
But I saw a headline recently that said that he's also now looking into these things as well. He's looking into other psychedelic research to learn about that too. So it sounds like he's really had his mind opened on this topic. And CNN, that they're publishing this, they deserve some credit.
I definitely do think it says something. It's not something that you'd expect to. It's not something that you'd expect to see in CNN. So the story continues, but today the ability of these drugs to alter our brain function is being tapped into as a potentially therapeutic for a range of mental health conditions, from anxiety and depression to addiction and obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD.
Somebody ought to prescribe this for James in Arizona.
I think that I think it would do wonders for James in Arizona. Says, only by losing the self can you find the self, explains Dr. Robin Carhart Harris from Imperial College London. These may not be the usual words of a scientist, but there is biology behind them. People try and run away from things and to forget, but with psychedelic drugs, they're forced to confront and really look at themselves, he says. The drugs Carhart Harris is referring to are hallucinogens such as magic mushrooms, specifically the active chemical inside them, psilocybin. We're beginning to identify the biological basis of the reported mind expansion associated with psychedelic drugs, he says. Psilocybin is not addictive and is interesting to researchers for its ability to make users see the world differently. The team at Imperial College has begun to unravel why. Carhart Harris scanned the brains of 30 healthy volunteers after they had been injected with psilocybin. And
whoa.
Yeah, like, so magic mushrooms are so dangerous that they have to be illegal, so they resort to using them intravenously, right, for their research purposes.
Well, it sounds like they've, I don't know if they've extracted the psilocybin. I don't know how you get psilocybin outside of the mushroom. There's probably some sort of process.
I've never felt any desire to make mushrooms stronger. I don't know why they would do that. It's like that Dennis Leary bit about crack. You know what I'm talking about?
I don't know.
It's like, only in America could there be a guy who cocaine wasn't strong enough for.
Okay.
It's like they're injecting psilocybin.
Well, actually, this is typically how it's done in a a laboratory environment. There were some studies done on DMT. There's a movie about DMT, which is another very powerful psychedelic entheogenic drug.
Very, very powerful.
It's amazing. And there's a movie about it called The Spirit Molecule. And they interview people who were involved in this laboratory testing of DMT. And the way they did it was hospital environment. They're in a bed. They've got a needle, and they injected them with DMT. So in the same way, I guess it's a way to measure, right? Because if you just take mushrooms, one of the problems with taking an eighth of mushrooms, okay, yeah, you can weigh the mushrooms. You know how much the mushrooms weigh.
Right.
But you don't actually know how much psilocybin is in one of those mushrooms. For instance, as I understand it, I'm not a mushroom expert. I've done them a number of times. But as I understand it, it's the caps, the heads of the mushrooms, if you will.
That's what I've been told,
the
too.
strongest concentration of the psilocybin is.
So if you get more caps, man, like get all stems.
Right. If you get all stems, then you're probably not going to have as intense of a trip as if you have some of the caps in there. And again, even with the caps, you really don't know what the concentration of psilocybin is in there. I mean, so it's just kind of a roll of the dice to some extent.
Yeah, exactly. So they injected it and found more primitive regions of the brain associated with emotional thinking became more active, and the brain's, quote, default mode network associated with high-level thinking, self-consciousness, and introspection was disjointed and less active. We know that a number of mental illnesses, such as OCD and depression, are associated with excessive connectivity of the brain, and the default mode network becomes overconnected, says David Nutt.
So they disconnect. So this disconnects some of those nodes that would normally be active with anxiety and depression?
Yeah, I think that, like, look,
let's come back with more analysis, opinion from, well, we're not really experts, but we've done mushrooms. 855 450 free. This is Free Talk Live. We are not doctors. This is not medical advice, but we are talking about magic mushrooms. And Christopher Cantwell with me. I'm Ian, and our toll-free number is 855 450 free. That's 855 450 3733. We just in the last segment of the last hour, to bring you up to speed if you're just tuning in, there's an article over at CNN.com about psychedelic mushrooms and how studies are now looking into possible effects of taking psychedelic mushrooms if you have anxiety and or depression, and looking at the reasons as to why it is that these things seem to have a positive effect.
Absolutely, yeah. They also say it might be helpful with addictions to other drugs because, as we know, mushrooms, to the best of our knowledge, are not addictive, right? I've never had I've never been fiending out for mushrooms, man. You know, I never wanted to go like rob somebody to go get some mushrooms, right? And what they're saying is they scan the brains of some volunteers, and they're saying that like it sort of disconnects some of the higher thinking, right? And in my own experience, like, look, I've suffered with some depression. I've had issues with alcohol and other substance abuse. And the thing with me is, like, I know, like, I'll get like stuck in my own head, right? And then I'm thinking about, you know, a million different things at once, and there are all these bad ideas are going on in my head, and I can't get away from them. So what they're saying is, excuse me. So they say, we know that a number of mental illnesses such as OCD and depression are associated with excessive connectivity of the brain, and the default mode network becomes overconnected. Nutt was formerly a drug advisor to the UK government.
Oh, is this David Nutt?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So he says he was formerly the drug advisor to the UK government, but was fired in 2009. They said he cannot be both a government advisor and a campaigner against government policy, wrote a member of the British Parliament, which is kind of hysterical.
Guy. This is the same guy, David Nutt. He's got one of those memorable names. He came out with the chart. He came out with the chart of the harm chart, the drug harm chart, where it basically took all of the most popular and least popular drugs or whatever, and they looked at what kind of harm these drugs cause, both the individual and their ostensible harm to society or the world or whatever. And it was a real shocking kind of study, because it revealed that alcohol and heroin were the two most damaging drugs to both the person and the society, the people that they're connected to, whereas marijuana was like pretty far down the list. And I think LSD or ecstasy were even further down the list than marijuana. Like, ecstasy was listed as one of the safest drugs as far as personal harm and
I think that's
societal
insane.
harm as well. I don't recall exactly where LSD was on the list, but I do remember that ecstasy or MDMA was lower than cannabis was. was on that list. So it was a real shocker, kind of a list, made a lot of headlines, and that's where we first heard about David Nutt. So it's good to hear that he's still out there doing good stuff.
He certainly is. And he says the overconnectivity Nutt describes causes depressed people to become locked into rumination and concentrate excessively on negative thoughts about themselves. Quote, by disrupting that network with psilocybin, you can liberate them from those depressive symptoms by showing them it's possible to escape those thoughts, he says. Depression is estimated to affect more than 350 million people around the world, according to the World Health Organization. The current pharmaceutical approach to treatment is with selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, such as Prozac, which increase levels of serotonin in the brain.
Apparently, they also
moods.
increase levels of shootings.
Yeah, exactly. Every time you hear about some guy going up and shooting up his school, it's pretty much inevitable that you're going to hear he's on SSRIs or something like that.
Scary. That's scary stuff to me, man. You don't hear that about people on mushrooms. I mean, there's every now and then you'll hear kind of the old wives' tale about some kid who took mushrooms or LSD and then jumped off a 20-story building.
Right, and it turns out they were thinking about some movie from the 90s called Natural Born Killers, and it was complete fiction.
Yeah, I don't know what the real story is. I mean, you hear these stories, but I know all the times I've been on mushrooms, I never would have thought about doing anything like that.
That's like the craziest, like taking mushrooms and getting into like, even a verbal altercation with somebody is just like the most far off thing from my mind. It'd be like, dude,
chill out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Like I think I'm going to go over here now.
I'm going to go take a walk in nature. See you later.
And I'm not shy about getting into altercations with people, but on mushrooms, I'm like, no. I'm going to go seek out positivity. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Exactly.
I just want to enjoy the colors, man. So, but SSRIs are not effective, and everyone take time to show an effect and are generally prescribed for long periods of time to maintain their effect. Nutt thinks psilocybin could be a game changer used as part of a therapeutic package where the mind-altering and confronting nature of the psychedelics are combined with therapy to treat people within just 1 or 2 doses of treatment.
That sounds shocking. Right? Because if you're on the SSRI, the idea is you're going to be on that for the rest of your life.
Exactly. And to get off of it is going to cause you all kinds of problems aside from your depression coming back.
So to suggest that you could have cured your depression within 1 to 2 doses and therapy sessions it sounds unbelievable to somebody who doesn't really understand this, but it sounds to me like completely plausible. So, for instance, there's actually been related stories about ecstasy or MDMA and how MDMA has been used now clinically in clinical testings to actually cure PTSD. Yeah. Like 1 dose, 1 therapy session. Cured.
Yeah, to reflect on it and to like sort of, I don't know, take that time and I know that was used in like couples therapies and stuff like that too, MDMA. I know with my own very limited experiences with it that like I feel a lot better for like days and weeks after having done it, and of course then I just get back into like drinking all the time and conspiracy theories and dating damaged women and just destroying myself, and that all goes away later on, but then I do it again and I feel good for a few weeks to a few months. And so I think I think that the way that they're putting this is really sort of interesting, that it allows a person to know that they can escape those thoughts, because sometimes I know in my own life, and I know with a lot of other people, that they can't. I feel like I can't control the way I think, right? And so if I've got, negative ideas, it's not like I just say, hey, bad ideas, go away, And if you have like negative ideas in your head all the time, that, it's a thing that weighs on you.
Oh, it's not good.
And so this sounds like a credible thing to me. I don't know that you take mushrooms twice and then you're just cured of unhappiness forever, but like depression is also a thing that's really gotten like screwed up in its definition, right? My uncle got a divorce, and like he was really upset about his divorce, which is like perfectly normal, right?
Sure.
And so a doctor decided to like put him on antidepressants. And I'm like, well, no, there's not a medical problem here. My uncle is in the middle of a divorce that's supposed to make him unhappy, Doc. What, this is crazy. And so, perhaps, using drugs
to work through it.
Using drugs to try to like cope with temporary situations is obviously not the way to do it. And this is why, like, when they say like 350 million people throughout the world, I don't know about all that. There was another story that I was looking at here too, that they say that there's like they're talking about a blood test for depression now, which is a thing that I'm kind of skeptical about, right? Because I do think, like, we had, like, our conspiracy movie marathon at the Brutalist House the other night. You know, one of the things we watched was about, like, all these things with psychotropic drugs and them giving SSRIs to people, and the history of psychiatry is like an industry of death, lobotomies, and all the lunatic things that they used to do to people. And some of this, I think, is just excuses to give people expensive medications that the insurance companies and governments will pay for and stuff like that.
Hold the rest of that thought.
Yeah.
We're going to come back with the mushroom topic here. But we've got Lumpy calling from the Shire. You're on Free Talk Live, Lumpy.
I heard that you stopped smoking pot, and I'm really, really, really sincerely concerned.
You know what? I'm glad that you did that.
It's been 24 hours.
It's been 24 hours.
You need to smoke more pot. So does Ian. What the hell did I just hear?
So what's going? I mean, did you just run out of pot, or
no? I'm just taking a break. That's all.
Yeah.
I was a little bored with it.
All right, okay, that's cool. I understand.
I haven't taken a break in like a decade. So,
well,
once upon a time, I actually quit smoking pot for a whole year.
If you start getting angry like Wit does, well, then the whole show is going to go down the drain. This is the worst tragedy. I think this is terrible.
Just Ian's going to strap on his body armor and be like, "Give me your gun.
Yeah. Back to the old me."
He's taking a break. You know, maybe it's time he's repressing all those feelings now. You know, maybe he's repressed. Maybe he's had all those peaceful feelings for so long, and now he's not going to smoke any pot. And then all of a sudden he's going to become a statist and then start strapping on his body armor. Who knows?
I'm going to become the voice of peace on Free Talk Live. It's going to be scary.
Oh, God,
well, that'd be a hell of a turnaround, wouldn't it? Hey, Lumpy, thanks for the call tonight, man. I appreciate it. Toll-free number. Thanks for the concern, too. I appreciate that. 855-450-3733. No, I have not had my last dance with Mary Jane. Just taking a break. 855-450-3733, because you can do that with pot, because it's not addictive. It's Free Talk Live. More coming up. Number is 855-450-FREE. We're talking about psychedelic mushrooms and how some people in the medical community are studying these drugs and finding out they might actually be really useful for helping people treat depression. And by treat, I mean maybe cure. That's what they're talking about. Maybe 2 doses with therapy sessions of magic mushrooms could cure depression or anxiety, and that's a really exciting concept.
That really would be magic.
No kidding. We'll come back with more details on that. 855-450-FREE. If you'd like to share your experience, have you ever been experienced, as Jimi Hendrix might ask? You can share your thoughts. Our toll-free number again, 855-450-FREE. Join us via Skype as well. Our Skype username is lrn.fm. And speaking of mushrooms, if you're looking to buy some, you should check out the Silk Road. Silk Road, or some of the other options on the dark net, as it's called, Tor, the anonymizing service. You can go to actually a website called Grams, where you can punch in what you're looking for. If you want to look at, punch in mushrooms, Grams will search all of the illicit drug sales sites and give you all of the results for mushrooms available across the darknet. It's pretty amazing technology.
It's like Google shopping for black market Tor networks.
Yep, that's exactly what it is.
Amazing.
And it works. So go and check that out. But, buyer beware. Also, we should put in the standard disclaimer. I'm not recommending you go out and do this, but at the same time, I've had positive experiences with it. You need to know what you're getting into, however, when you're going to engage in psychedelic drugs. You need to learn about the substance in advance, read other people's experiences. There's a great website called Erowid.org, EROWID.org.
I was just going to say Erowid. That's a good site.
It's the best site out there for all things related to the psychedelic experience, or to drugs in general, not just psychedelics, but they've got alcohol and pills, prescription pills. They're all just kind of just chock full of info, as much information as you could possibly want. Especially the more popular a drug is, the more information there is about it. The newer things, like the synthetics, there's not that much information about them, but they do have them listed there as well. So do your research first. Know about set and setting before you get involved in this. Chris, you made that mistake with taking DMT at a very inappropriate set and setting a little while back.
I had
and
a
it wasn't
terrifying experience with DMT.
Now, DMT is a very powerful hallucinogenic substance. Mushrooms can also be very, very powerful, and if you don't know what you're getting into, you do need to learn about that first. And set and setting's the most important thing to know, is that if you're in a strange place around people you don't know, please do not do psychedelic drugs. If you are with people who have experienced these drugs previously, who you trust, who you appreciate, who you love, and you're in a place that you're comfortable, there's no better place than that place to do something like that. Your mindset's also important. If you're afraid, don't do it. If you are angry, probably not the best mindset to be in. You don't want those sensations to be amplified while you're on this particular substance. So try to come into it with an open mind, with a positive mindset. Have the intention, set the intention in advance that you're going to gain from the experience, that you're going to have a positive experience. So setting doesn't just mean what's outside of you. It also means what's inside of you. All those things are very important. So we've been, Chris, you've been sharing a story with us from CNN.com. We pretty much hit the high points of the piece. The suggestion here being that there's some studies being done that are saying that maybe magic mushrooms, psilocybin, can possibly help cure depression, cure anxiety. The not-so-medical explanation, as I understood it, was that essentially people with anxiety and depression have too many connections going on in their heads, and that the magic mushrooms will disconnect those connections.
Yeah, at least temporarily, to show them that it's like possible to sort of escape those negative thoughts. The other thing that they went into that I do want to get into briefly before we move on is that they talked about it being used to treat other addictions, like to smoking or alcohol.
Alcoholism. I've heard about the alcohol thing.
Yeah, and it says the new research, however, has always scratched the surface of the brain and its consciousness. The brain is about organizing information and predicting external world, and we think psilocybin disrupts that and makes it more chaotic, says Nutt. People have hallucinations because instead of seeing the world as the brain expects it to be, you see what the brain is doing. This chaos could potentially treat not only depression but also addictions such as smoking and alcoholism, which were the subject of some of the earliest studies of psychedelics in the 1950s and 60s before laws against the drugs were introduced. And I think it's interesting to point out that if you look into the history of like Alcoholics Anonymous, one of the first things that the guy who created it was saying was, let's give people hallucinogenic drugs. I mean, before,
really?
Yeah, that was at the start of AA, is give people LSD specifically. He was suggesting
far
this.
out,
and then AA became NA, and now you can't do any intoxicants now because because
it's all bad.
Because
they're all the same.
Yep.
Oh wait, no, they're not. No, I think it's fascinating. In fact, I remember we've read something similar to this in the past, or it sounds very, very similar to me. I know I mentioned earlier the MDMA studies about curing possibly PTSD, which is supposedly incurable.
Yeah.
With all the treatments that they have, they took folks who had tried everything for PTSD and just weren't making any progress, and they gave them MDMA, had one therapy session, and it was cured. And they talked about how back in the 60s or whatever, before all these drugs were outlawed, or in the 50s, they had begun doing some of this research, and they had started to uncover some very interesting stuff. And then it all ground to a halt because it was all prohibited. All the research, once the drugs were banned, they were also banned from the lab.
Exactly.
Laboratory environments were not allowed to do experiments with these drugs, and now for some reason some of them are able to do it. I don't know if they're being done in other countries or what the circumstances are, because the DEA, I don't think, wants to just give carte blanche to people to do research on these things, because they're going to find out stuff like this, that hey, these things could be used in positive ways that can help people change their lives for the better. And the fact that we haven't been able to look into this for the last 40 or 50 years is a real tragedy. I mean, that's a national tragedy.
Yeah, it's disgusting what's happening, because I do believe that, like, if you have a Schedule I drug, there are certain conditions under which research can be done, but they're damn near impossible to reach.
Yeah, you basically have to beg the DEA for a permission
This study,
slip.
I believe, was done in London, is what they're talking about. So in the UK, I mean, which is about to become a little bit smaller, hopefully.
Yeah.
In Britain, mushrooms are illegal there. You're not allowed to have them. But
right.
Apparently, if some scientific people or have some credibility and want to do some research, they can inject psilocybin into patients. So
amazing.
And I do think it's interesting for me. And like I had even like entertained this recently, like before I saw the story. It was why it really like rang a bell to me. I was like, maybe I should go like trip out in mushrooms by myself for a little while. I've been having kind of a tough time, and and then I see the story and I'm like, well, it seems like an even better idea now.
I support it, man. I mean, I take them for spiritual purposes, basically, just to kind of enjoy. I don't take them for like some sort of group party thing. In fact, I find that psychedelics like mushrooms and LSD make me not social. I'm not. If I take a half an eighth of mushrooms, I can still be social. But if I take an eighth of mushrooms, I'm gonna want to go curl up in a ball somewhere and just have shut my eyes and have closed eye visuals and just kind of go inside myself for a little bit.
Yeah, it's not conducive to the most stimulating of conversations, I think. And
no, it's hard to have a conversation when you're having an ego death, which I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but I think that I have, and it was pretty interesting.
Can you describe an ego death? I've never heard that term before.
For lack of a better term, that's what I would describe it as. There was one time I took I think it was like an eighth of mushrooms and had just the most profound, beautiful experience walking through the park here in Keene, New Hampshire, and just beautiful colors and wonderful visuals, and came back, went and laid down, and at that point kind of died in my own mind in a way, and essentially had to resuscitate myself almost, like my body wasn't dying, I don't think, or anything like that, but internally my mind.
We can say with certainty that you weren't dying.
Well, right,
like, literally.
Right. I mean, I lived through it, but it felt like I had disintegrated into nothing, basically, and that I had to essentially reform myself from that, and sort of was rebirthed, if you will, on my own volition. I mean, it was something I had to reach for. I felt like had I just let myself go, that I would have died completely. But I felt like I'd kind of come back from that, and it was just a pure sheer will of
was it scary?
Not really, but it felt comforting.
To my knowledge, there's never been like an overdose death from psilocybin.
No, it wasn't like that.
Right?
It wasn't like that. That's why I described it as an ego death. I wasn't in any way. My physical body wasn't harmed, but the personality, me or whatever, just kind of washed out for a moment, went to nothing, and then I sort of kind of brought myself back from that, just because I'm not done yet here.
And did you feel like that stuck with you for some period of time afterwards?
I think that a psychedelic experience sticks with you. I mean, I think that absolutely these things are life-changing experiences. I mean, the first time I did MDMA, I finally had some appreciation for nature. I was a young man in my early 20s when I did MDMA for the first time, and I never really cared about nature. It was just like there, trees. Okay, fine. There's nature out there. And then when I was on MDMA, I really had an appreciation for it. I saw the beauty in it for the first time, and ever since then, it's been a permanent shift for me. So
that's interesting. I've done I did a lot of drugs when I was younger, and I don't think I appreciated them at the time.
Yeah.
And like I said, when I did mushrooms in 2013, I hadn't done them for upwards of a decade, previously.
Totally different experience.
Totally different experience that I had, not done anything like that in a long time, and I was more mature and able to appreciate it much differently. And I thought that was a profound experience. Meanwhile, when I was taking acid and smoking PCP all the time in my teens and early 20s, I was just like, we're a drug addict, let's go.
F it. Right? Yeah. All right, so more coming up here in moments. Yeah, I'm grateful that I didn't do drugs as a teenager like that. I smoked some pot, but besides that, pot and alcohol. I think that having some maturity along with drugs like this, psychedelic drugs, is a good thing.
Free Talk Live, 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern, live on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.